Okay, so let's dive in. We're seeing this big shift, right? The global economy is getting more digital, moving towards decentralization, more person-to-person stuff.
Exactly. Value exchange changing quite a bit.
And today, our deep dive is looking at a project that, well, the material we've gathered, it presents it as trying to make digital finance really accessible, like just using your phone.
That's the one. Pi Network, we've got this stack of articles, some research papers here. And yeah, the goal for this deep dive is really to get to grips with the core ideas and I guess the potential that these sources are talking about for Pi.
And, reading through it, what the sources reveal is pretty interesting. They frame it as more than just your standard crypto project.
Different angle.
Yeah, it's presented as like deeply rooted in its community, big ambitions for actual real-world use, financial inclusion, that kind of thing.
Right.
And here's the bit that, according to this material, really jumps out. The sheer scale it's apparently already hit.
Yeah, talk about that.
We're talking over 60 million verified users. Pioneers, that's the term they use. Which, honestly, sounds like a surprisingly huge number based on where the sources say it is.
It does. It's significant. And a core concept the sources highlight, key to that accessibility, is how they approach mining.
The mobile mining thing?
Exactly. It's not like Bitcoin or Ethereum, needing massive energy, powerful computers. The material describes Pi Network using a method that, well, they claim doesn't drain your phone battery or eat up data.
Okay, so the idea is basically anyone with a smartphone could potentially participate, get involved in distributing the tokens.
That's how it's presented, yeah, making it much more accessible globally.
So the sources are really positioning this whole thing as a potential long-term financial opportunity. Is that the gist?
That seems to be the angle. An opportunity built, they argue, on community participation. Plus, this technological innovation aimed squarely at accessibility, trying to bring digital currency to a much wider audience than maybe we've seen before.
Okay, got it. So the initial picture from the sources is community-driven, mobile-first, already scaled up significantly. How do they describe the journey, like, from that starting point towards actual real-world use?
Well, the material traces it back. Started as experimental work, apparently, by some Stanford grads, and it describes how it grew from there into this pretty active ecosystem. Still developing, mind you, but active.
And the sources seem to make a big deal about the Open Mainnet launch. Early 2025, they say.
Oh, definitely. That's highlighted as a major turning point. The sources suggest it's a really significant step towards being more decentralized and, crucially, enabling more usability.
Makes sense. And that community, the 60 million pioneers we mentioned, the sources describe them as actively involved.
Very much so. Involved in security, growth, utility, all of it, according to the material. It even points to examples like local barter events happening.
Oh, interesting. Like trading goods directly for Pi.
Seems so. And also applications being built right inside the Pi browser. These are presented as concrete examples of this community innovation already taking place.
The sources even pull a quote, I think, from Nicholas Kukalis, one of the founders, saying something like, they're not just building another crypto, but empowering a community.
Yeah.
A community believing in inclusive digital value, fair access.
Yeah, that quote really underscores the narrative we see running through all this material. Very community-centric.
It really does. And speaking of community, the sources put a lot of weight on trust and this idea of grassroots adoption.
They do. And what's interesting there is how they contrast Pi's mining again, presented as energy efficient, mobile friendly with, the old proof of work systems, Bitcoin, Ethereum, heavy hardware, huge energy costs.
Which, the sources argue, helps level the playing field, right? Makes it genuinely global.
That's the argument presented. And the material suggests this trust wasn't accidental. It was cultivated, apparently, through consistent updates, open communication from the core team, the founders, the main developers.
Okay, so keeping people in the loop.
Right. And they argue this approach helped keep enthusiasm high, kept people participating, even when the wider crypto market was, going through rough patches.
And this trust, this communication, seems to be what the sources say is driving that grassroots adoption you mentioned.
Looks like it. The material specifically calls out places like Indonesia, Nigeria, Vietnam, even China, saying local businesses, community groups are already trading goods and services using Pi.
Wow. Even before it's listed widely on major exchanges.
That's what the sources report, yeah. Which naturally brings up questions about their whole strategy,
Sure. Skepticism is normal in this space.
Of course. But the sources suggest Pi Network is trying to set itself apart. They point to the explicit focus on building long-term utility first, this phased development and launch process they followed, and the move towards decentralized governance.
And they particularly highlight that decision, the one the team apparently made, to delay open exchange trading until certain benchmarks for the ecosystem and utility were actually met.
Exactly. The sources frame that decision as evidence. Evidence of commitment to sustainable development rather than just chasing short-term speculative buzz.
Okay. What about the economics? How is that presented in the material?
Well, what's described as quite interesting is the economic model. It aims, they say, to balance scarcity with demand, trying to support long-term value.
And how do they plan to do that, according to the sources?
The sources point to a few things. Features like mandatory KYC verification, know your customer before you can move your mined Pi to the main network.
Okay, for security and compliance.
Seems so. Also, options for staking or locking up the Pi you've mined, which can boost your mining rate. And the operation of community nodes, people running the network software as key infrastructure. All building towards what they describe as a healthy, secure, scalable, decentralized economy.
So for people already involved, the pioneers, the message from the sources isn't just stack up as many coins as possible.
Not solely, no. It suggests the focus shifts towards how you actually engage, how you use the Pi to participate in this digital economy they're describing.
Right, because the potential value isn't just theoretical, it's tied to use.
That's the idea presented. With marketplaces, apps, peer-to-peer payments supposedly on the horizon as outlined in the material, each Pi coin is framed as representing a unit of trust, community value, maybe future buying power.
And the sources argue that getting involved earlier, being more active in the network, helps unlock more of that described potential.
That's the suggestion, yeah.
And participating could mean different things, right? Like the lockups you mentioned for bonus mining.
Yep. Or maybe trying to build an app in the Pi browser if you're a developer.
Or even just supporting other pioneers. Verifying transactions, running a node, like you said. Actions the sources frame as contributing to the bigger picture, not just your own stash.
Exactly. It's presented as a collective effort.
Okay. And what about people hearing about this now? For newcomers, what do the sources say? Is it too late?
The sources are pretty direct on that. They argue, no, it's not too late to join. They point out the Open Mainnet has been live since early 2025. New features are still rolling out.
So the door's still open, basically.
That's the message. The opportunity to mine Pi, become part of this movement, is still accessible. If you have a smartphone and, as the source material puts it, a vision for a decentralized future.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together then. Based purely on the material we've looked at, the vision presented for Pi Network is what? A decentralized, accessible, user-driven financial system.
Yes, fundamentally. One built on that bedrock of community trust, and powered by the grassroots adoption the sources say is already happening in places like Indonesia, Nigeria, Vietnam, China, and with a very clear focus, they claim, on real-world utility over just hype.
And the sources mention ongoing milestones the core team is working on, things to watch.
They do. Things like expanding the ecosystem apps, launching something called the Pi Ad Network, working on global merchant integration, making the node network even more decentralized, and pursuing more exchange listings eventually.
And these are presented in the material as kind of key indicators to gauge future growth towards what they hope will be mass adoption.
That seems to be how the sources frame them, yes. Markers of progress.
Okay. And finally, the sources seem to bring it right back to you, the listener. For current users, pioneers, they suggest the real focus now is less about the number count and more about actively participating, contributing to the ecosystem's utility.
Right. And for newcomers, the material says, hey, the opportunity is still there now that Open Mainnet is live.
It feels like the core message coming out of the sources is really about what you do with this potential digital asset. It leaves us with this pretty provocative question to think about.
Yeah. Which one is that?
It asks directly, how will you shape your digital future? The answer might be in your Pi wallet.
That definitely gives you something to chew on. It raises that important question. Based on this material, what is this potential future, this vision of community, utility, accessibility in a decentralized economy, as described in these sources? What does that mean for your participation? What value, according to this source material, could a digital asset like Pi, built on those principles they talk about, potentially hold for you in the long run? Leaves you thinking.